everyone. This is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com, where truth matters. So I was on X yesterday, or was it this morning? It was at some point. I happened to see Danny, and Danny calls himself Danny Phil Talk, Philosophy Talk. Danny pointed to a portion of a video that was of him and Jordan Peterson at the Surrounded channel on Jubilee. And it was really interesting because I thought Danny was quite the smartass. And in fact, it totally reminded me of Clint Eastwood when he played a grumpy old man. And so then that movie Gran Torino, if you recall Clint Eastwood, he was very grumpy and old. And it kind of seemed how Jordan Peterson was reacting to Danny, because Danny had definitely had a chip on his shoulder, definitely thought that he was superior to Jordan, and he was completely insulting to him. And so we're going to get into a couple of details about that. But first, I wanted to say Jordan had a few different premises that I agree with. So he says the first one that he said, his first challenge, was that atheists reject God, but they don't know what they're rejecting. And it's interesting because Jordan defines God as sort of a consistency with one's conscience. And I think that's a good one. He also says that God is a unified source of morality. And I also agree with that statement. Unfortunately, Jordan, though, is still dancing around the idea of becoming a Christian, because he believes, if he says he believes in Christianity, it also equates to that he would die for Christianity. A belief means that you would go to the ultimate ends for this particular belief. And he says he believes in Christianity. That could be a problem for him. And so Danny confronted him and asked him, are you a Christian? And Jordan said that's really not his business. He said that he doesn't need to tell Danny what he is. Now, Jordan's wife, Tammy Peterson, experienced a miraculous cure of cancer. And part of that she attributes to starting to pray the rosary with a friend of hers and praying the Hail Mary. And she converted to Catholicism. In fact, she went through the whole program, the RCIA program, and became a Catholic. And so Danny sort of leveraged that to say that he knows that Jordan's going to church sometimes with his wife, and started asking about Mary. So let's get to the second premise, and then we'll get to the third one, because the third one is where Danny jumps in here. So the third one is that morality and purpose are not derived by science. And of course, that's completely true, because morality and purpose are prescriptive, okay? We have moral duties and moral obligations. They're moral prescriptions. So it follows, of course, that there is a divine moral lawgiver. If you have moral prescriptions or obligations, it does follow that you have a source of that. And the source has to be transcendent if these morals are also transcendent to humans, which they are. And so that's a pretty interesting thing. And so, yes, science can't explain that. Science is only descriptive. It can't, by definition, be prescriptive. So again, I will agree with Jordan Peterson on that. And I will also agree that everyone worships something. And that's where Danny jumped in. So Danny jumped into this idea of whether or not he worships something. And Jordan defined it as attend to, sacrifice for, or prioritize. And so what Danny did is Danny first asked, yeah, that is Danny from Phil Talk. You got it. That's Cafe. It's definitely Danny from Phil Talk. So Danny asked whether or not Catholics worship Mother Mary. And of course, that's the idea of, do they attend to Mother Mary? Do they prioritize Mother Mary? Would they make sacrifices for Mother Mary? And I believe if you define it that way, yes, of course. But Jordan defines worship in kind of a broader way. And so it's not the kind of worship you think about when you talk about merely worshiping God and the idea of worshiping the highest good. And so I do believe that Catholics revere Mother Mary. And here's what I would say. I would say that in this whole conversation, which we'll listen to a little bit of a clip of it, even though they've got a copyright on this, which is super annoying. But let's listen to this, and we will see what all of you think. Why can't I get, oh my gosh, Danny just got locked out. Let's see. The girl right before was very polite to him. I would recommend that that's how you want to interact. Now, of course, my video is not wanting to pick this up. Wow.
Well, I would say more or less voluntarily self-sacrificing.
But that's also what we came to, though, is that someone can be like 60% or 70% Christian based on simply just acting in that way.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins is like that.
I watched that debate.
Let's pause there. We've been voted out by the majority.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Really, very thoughtful.
But Danny, on the other hand, was probably the worst interlocutor I've ever seen. And he's been on my channel
Dr.
before.
Peterson.
How are you doing?
Danny, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
You say atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But you would put
place.
it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back.
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but
See, Danny doesn't want to listen to this idea of having a hierarchy. Now, he's going to ask if she is the most important human. And I would say that, yes, she is. She's certainly, when she's Jesus' mother, Jesus gave her the honor of being the one who brings him up, spends 30 plus years with him, and knows him from his very birth. Clearly, she's been singled out and elevated by God. And so therefore, the rest of us also should elevate and revere her as our mother. That's one of the reasons why when John was at the foot of the cross and Jesus looked down at John, and his own mother, John's biological mother, was standing there as well, according to a different gospel. But when John was standing there at the foot of the cross and next to Mary, Mother Mary, Jesus said, "Behold your mother." And one of the reasons why John referred to himself in there as the beloved disciple is because we're all beloved disciples, and Mother Mary is all of our spiritual mother. That's how Catholics revere her. We don't worship her as God. We don't claim she's divine, but we certainly revere her as probably the most important creation that was ever made. She is the new Ark of the Covenant. She is the most wonderful immaculate conception, meaning she was immaculately conceived in her mother's womb without original sin. So here we go.
but within
And
the
there's something at the top.
all right, you can worship things
Mary is
below.
quite a ways up the hierarchy, but
Do-
not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to,
Attend to. Do
prioritize, and
Catholics
sacrifice for.
do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't
Well,
add that to my definition.
you understand.
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend to.
So you can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now
there's
you're
a-
adding stuff to the definition, but your original
I
definition.
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure,
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are
How
very
do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smart.
Now, in defense of Jordan Peterson, it's Jordan Peterson versus 20 atheists. It's not Christian versus atheists. So maybe Danny doesn't know where he is,
Ass.
Well-
and I mean,
and he's being a smartass.
Either you're a
'cause I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk
not.
to you if you're a smart ass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell
could be-
you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression I
private.
was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video,
You're really quite something. You are.
aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
See, Danny really blew it, unfortunately, because he showed that he is somewhat of a pompous thing. I mean, I hate to pass judgment on him, but the way he came across was so disrespectful. And it's one of those things where you get these young kids and they think that they can stand up to somebody who's literally lived decades longer and knows decades more than he knows. You know, Dr. Peterson is, again, a psychology professor with a PhD. He's taught at Harvard. Clearly, there's a certain level of respect that should be offered him in these conversations. And Danny didn't want to do that. He just got very, very rough on him. And so Book and Briar says it was originally labeled as Christian versus atheist. Okay, so and Cafe says, I really think Danny's way out of his league here. Yeah, I would have to agree. So I would say that probably of the the debaters. This was the instance of the worst one. And then some of the other ones, there were some who were pretty polite, and there were other ones who were definitely going after the gotcha questions. But I have to say, again, I agree with a lot of this stuff as far as the Jordan's claims. So here we go.
Hi there.
Hi, nice
What's
to
your
meet you.
name?
Gerard.
Hello, Gerard.
Nice to meet you, sir. So you've said that worship is when you
Now, Gerard is starting off on a better thing. He called him sir. I think that's a little more polite, a little nicer way to call it instead of saying you're nothing.
prioritize and sacrifice for something, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
but there's a hierarchy in there.
Sure. So I prioritize and sacrifice for my wife more than I would prioritize and sacrifice for a random person on the street, right?
Probably. Yeah.
Presumably. Do I worship
I don't know.
my
I've
wife?
seen some pretty bad marriages.
Assuming a good marriage, are you saying I worship my wife?
I'm trying to define worship.
Well, that's what I'm asking. So prioritize and sacrifice. I do
The
those
higher it
things.
is in the hierarchy, the more what you're doing is akin to worship. But even in your
Okay.
trivial acts of attention, you're prioritizing and partaking in worship, even if you don't know it.
So I am
And it's
prioritizing.
partly, well, with regard
I think it's interesting, this discussion of worship, and I just wanted to point out a couple of other things. And one with respect to, do you worship your wife? Well, no, you certainly consider her worth something. She's worth, we know worship comes from the word worthy. So worthy of worship, basically. And so the idea that people do worship something, well, I would certainly say that there's a lot of people, I would say, worship football. And worship Sunday football, worship Saturday college football. They might worship soccer, the version of football over in other countries. They might worship their car. I've seen some people spend hours and hours just cleaning and taking care of their cars. And it seems to me like they consider that worthy of a ton of their time. And I think that people also tend to worship other material goods. And of course, people do worship humans. I mean, look at the way people treat some of the sports stars or the movie stars that are out there. We certainly see that. And so I would agree with Jordan that everyone does worship something. Now, Jesus gave us one command: love the Lord above all else and love your neighbors as yourself. We are supposed to hold the Lord at the utmost, highest level in this hierarchical system of worship. That is where the Lord stands. That's where he deserves to be. He's the creator. And everyone else is secondary. And so the idea of giving the Lord your time and your attention, that's exactly how it's supposed to be spent. And that's one of the things that you want to do as a Christian. And so, I want to say thank you, everybody in the chat. I just wanted to do this really quick video to give you some of my opinions. I thought Danny, I was not impressed with Danny's performance in the video. I thought that he acted a bit pompous, and I think he could have definitely done better. I've had interactions with him on my channel where he was much more polite, much reasoned. But I think on a channel like this, when he's going up against Jordan Peterson, who's pretty much a rock star, who has millions of people who followed him, sold millions of books. He's very intimidating. I think Danny came out there with basically ready, with his gloves on, ready to fight, and it showed. And unfortunately, I think that does play badly for atheists. If atheists want to be accepted more in society, especially societies that tend to look down on atheism or look down on atheists, and some societies do. If they want to be more accepted, you don't want to come across as being a pompous young kid, and that sort of thing. That's just not how you want to come across. And so I could say that he could probably reflect on that and do a better presentation in the future. And then as far as other people, as what a Christian says here, atheists use Danny's behavior as their victory. So sad that they think that was the best they did. I think that there was definitely some other people in that conversation that were much kinder towards Jordan, much more respectful. And I think he did a good job in picking out the young woman that he picked out to chat with again at the end. Pathetic hermetic says, pathetic. Danny just wanted to beat Jordan. It was pathetic and everyone could see it. Yeah, it was like a fight, and he was basically trying to pit himself against Jordan and put Jordan in the Catholic Church when Jordan hasn't agreed to go into the Catholic Church. He hasn't accepted Catholicism. He hasn't gone through the whole process. He's still got his doubts. It's one of the things that I actually find a little bit annoying, because I feel like Jordan needs to jump into the pool, stop skipping around the sides of the pool, get in the pool. You figured out the Bible. You figured out a lot of stuff with respect to God. You're referring to the Bible all the time between Cain and Abel and all of the other passages that you talk about extensively. You understand the point of the Christian God and the purpose of self-sacrifice, and how when we live, part of the purpose is for God and for eternity eventually. And so it's just one of those things. So you want to make sure that you, of course, are attuned to the right things. So thank you, everybody, for coming in here. I hope you like this kind of content. If you like it, please like, subscribe, and do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Thank you.